of deliverance this Wednesday and next Wednesday. We won't be having Bible study the last 2 Wednesdays of July for obvious reasons. Even like right now, there's a lot of people out, and we don't want to burden our workers. That's the biggest reason. I don't care if only 5 people show up, and we can teach, but it can be a burden to the workers whenever we continue. So this week and next week, we will have Bible study. Next week, Pastor Caleb is going to be sharing on evangelism. And this week, I'm going to kind of be sharing on evangelism. For those of you that came to home group, you're going to find this topic a bit familiar, and you're going to be hearing a lot about it in the future as we prepare for the next conference. And Chris, who's on the computer? Yeah, so I've only got 2 verses today that are really going to be key, and that is in Matthew chapter 28, 18 through 20, and 1 Timothy 4 and 5. Those are going to kind of be the themes behind. But John 8, first I'm going to read this in John 8. Because what is the whole purpose of evangelism? If somebody could tell me in a nutshell, what is the purpose of evangelism? To share the good news. But so what is the purpose of the good news? Right, to save the lost. And what is salvation? It's deliverance, right? Salvation is deliverance. So the whole purpose of salvation is to get someone from bondage to freedom. So with that said, John 8:32, it says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." So the whole purpose of the truth of the gospel is for freedom. And then if you bounce forward to verse 36, it says, "Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed." So I want to train us in this teaching on evangelism to move beyond seeing evangelism as telling people about Jesus and wanting to see them saved. But we want to see them free indeed. Right? We want to see them delivered. So this entire conference and teaching that we've done all this time on deliverance, I want you all to begin to see that as the result of salvation. And remember, we talked about that deliverance comes in stages, right? Number 1 is salvation. Number 2 is dealing with the strongholds. So, or the systems of thinking. In other words, getting them to understand their thinking is off. That would be step 2, right? So step 1 is just getting them saved. So when we're witnessing to somebody and we're sharing Jesus with somebody, the number 1 goal is to get them saved. But once they're saved, then we have to apply the word and begin teaching them that, hey, some of the things that you've been thinking are not accurate. And sometimes that can be a rude awakening for somebody, and sometimes people can really vehemently disagree with that even as Christians, right? So we have to let the Word of God kind of penetrate their hearts, and we need to get them in something like a Bloom or get them in something like the Foundations class for Sunday school. Get them in a place to where they can receive the truth hitting against that thinking. So that's the second step. Then the third step is the process of transformation, renewing your mind. That means the person now has heard the Word of God. They recognize that their thinking has been off, and there's several ways our thinking can be off when we get saved. One of the easiest ones to pick on is to think that God doesn't heal today, right? Or that the Spirit doesn't move today, and tongues aren't for today. And if you get saved having that mentality, is that mentality suddenly going to change because you become a Christian? The same can be applied to if you have a history of alcoholism, if you have a history of drug addiction. Just because you get saved does not mean those things are broken in your life. First, there has to be teaching. And then, ultimately, there has to be a commitment by the person to be transformed. And, of course, we know the 4th stage of deliverance is total freedom, where the person has a disciplined pattern in their life, where they're living the Christian life based on what's in them, what they've put in them. I compared it to driving a stick. When I drive a stick or when I drive a car, I don't have to think about the motions anymore. They come naturally. Even like my lawnmower. One thing about my lawnmower is if you go forward, you're all good. But if you go backward, the engine will die unless you know to pull the knob to give that engine a chance to do whatever it needs to do while it's backing up. And then you can let it go. I don't have to think about that. Now, when I first got that mower, I killed it like 15 times backing up because I wasn't used to it. But once my thinking was changed, it just became part of me. And that's really our goal with the people that we witness to is, number one, to get them saved. Number two, to begin to teach them the truth. Because the truth is what penetrates their thinking and gets them thinking, you know what, I'm not right about this. I'm not right about God moving today. I'm not right about, I have to be once an addict, always an addict, which they teach you in AA, right? I'm not right about the fact that I can't ever get free from drugs. I'm not right about the fact that witchcraft in my family is passed down from generation. It can stop with me. See, these things need to be taught. And then that's when stage 3 of deliverance is in place to where they start implementing these things in their lives and their thinking changes. They're starting to be transformed. Then once that transformation takes place, then they have the disciplines in place to where they just automatically do things just based on their spiritual training. And that's the goal of evangelism, but first we have to start by getting them saved, right? We have to start by presenting the gospel. That is like the key. And we're going to talk more about that next week, presenting the gospel and some of the tools and how to do that. But what I'm going to talk about today more is the process of evangelism and the levels of evangelism. So let's go to Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20. And you've heard this dozens and dozens of times, but here we go again. It says, and Jesus came to them and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And we can't just gloss past that. We can't just blow through that. Okay, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Now, therefore, go. So what is Jesus really saying here? Think about it for a second. He's saying, I have all authority, now you go. So what is he telling the church to do? So we have legal access to go in his name now. So when we go, we are going in his authority. So when we're his children, he's emphatic. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, now therefore go. For example, I wish Daryl was here because we could give an example of this. But whenever you have a deputy sheriff has been deputized by the sheriff in order to function in his office in his absence, right? While the sheriff is present, the sheriff is in charge, and the deputy just helps. But when the sheriff is not there, then the deputy has been deputized with the authority of the sheriff to implement the law in that jurisdiction. And it's the very same thing that Jesus is doing here. He's deputizing the church. He's saying, all authority has been given to me. Now you go in my authority and make disciples. Now you notice he didn't just say, make converts. He could have said that. Jesus could have said, get people saved, right? Preach the gospel and get people saved. He could have said that. But he said, make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So the first thing the disciple does is gets baptized. Right? That is the first event in a disciple's life is baptism in water. So Jesus is saying, go in my authority and make disciples. Make people of discipline. And remember, what is the fourth stage of deliverance? Discipline. When we get to the place to where we do things based on discipline, not based on being told. Little kids. For those of you that have had little kids that have older kids now, there are certain things that they did as children because you told them over and over and over and over, right? And what was the common thing that a little kid says whenever you say, okay, how come you didn't clean up your room? How come you didn't take out the trash? How come you didn't do that? It's 2 words. What do they normally say? I forgot. And it's okay when they're little, right? Because they haven't developed that mechanism yet. But there comes a point where they're more adult-like, and they're able to function more adult-like, and I forgot's no longer a good excuse. It should be a discipline at this point. And that's where we want to get people to. Not only do we want to get our people to this point here in the house, but when we go and minister to people outside of these walls, we want to get them to that place too. And I think the church has really left a lot of people at the altar. They've gotten them saved, right? And they never apply that teaching to where they can say, you know what, my thinking hasn't been right on this. Because and here's the mistake we make, especially as Pentecostal Christians, is we think people get saved and they're just automatically fully delivered, right? Anybody remember that teaching? You just get to the altar, get saved, and you're transformed and all things. And it's true. But for me, getting saved is more like when you play a video game and you hit the reset button. All your history is kind of washed away. But you still kind of have the same knowledge. And if you haven't improved, you're still going to get stuck at the same point in the game. Especially back in my day when games didn't have memory like they do today. Like the Atari and the Sega. When you hit the reset button, you were starting over. There was no save points, checkpoints, and all this stuff. There were no memory. You were starting over. And then you worked your way all the way back through to the point where you stumbled again and you hope to get past that place. Right? Well, getting saved is similar. It's like a reset button where everything is refreshed. You got a brand new start, but if you don't change your thinking and address the strongholds, the systems of thinking in your life, and the evil forces backing them, then you get to that same point and you stumble again. How many times have we seen that in a brand new child of God's life? They're addicted to drugs, or they're addicted to this certain circumstance, or they have this sin nature, and they get saved, and they get the reset button, they get refreshed, or they get renewed. 2 Corinthians 5:17 is true in their lives. If any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. Old things have passed away, behold, all things have become new. And they get to that same spot and that same temptation, and they fall again. And see, our goal is to help them avoid that through training. Because in a video game, what happens? In a video game, you should learn from your previous attempts, right? And you can get further and further along. But also in video games, they have manuals. And these manuals will give you instructions on how each level functions so that you can get past those a little more easily. Now, you may stumble, but the hope is that you stumble at a point further along, right? See, that's called growth. Growth doesn't mean I never stumble. Growth means I made it further along than I did last time. I didn't trip over the same obstacle as I did last time. So then we get them to that place to where they're getting further and further along to where they're being transformed. Because Tayshawn, not to put him on the spot, but a long time ago, we downloaded a ROM of Mario 64. And a ROM is just basically a fake version of the game that's very similar. And he would get stuck at certain points, but then one day, I can't remember how old he was, he beat it. He beat the game. And he was really proud of himself. And then from that point, he could beat it with relative ease. And that's where we want to get Christians. To where they've been through something enough to where they can beat that thing with relative ease, to where at some point, the game isn't even challenging anymore. And then they come out with a new game, right? It has harder levels. And that's the way life works, because the enemy will come at you with harder things. But because you've got some road experience and you got some training, you got your brothers and sisters in Christ standing by your side, and you have the training and equipment that the church has given you, you're able to make it further along. One of the greatest hindrances for men in the church, I don't remember the statistics, but it's staggering, it's pornography. And we have got to be prepared to handle not only those that may be in the house that are struggling with this issue, but those that we may bring in. Because if over half the men in the church are struggling with it, how many outside are struggling with it? And then we just pretend it doesn't happen? We just pretend, oh, we're not going to talk about this. No, we've got to help them overcome that so that each time they get stronger and stronger, and that's the goal. So Jesus is saying, we have authority here. We have his authority to make disciples, not just converts, disciples. People who are disciplined. So we address the systems of thinking, and then they begin to transform. See, transformation does not occur through teaching. Transformation occurs through application of teaching. I can sit here and watch a tutorial on Mario 64 all day. I can watch somebody on YouTube go through the entire game and beat it, but until I play it and learn the specific obstacles I may face that the person on the screen did not, then I'm not going to have success. And then lastly, there's discipline. Just knowing what to do. There's another video game. I hate to use video games, but they're so applicable in this. Is Punch-Out. Does anybody old enough to remember Punch-Out? Mike Tyson's Punch-Out specifically. Each opponent had a specific pattern. If you could figure out the opponent's specific pattern, you could beat them every time. But figuring it out was tough. You spent a lot of time getting knocked out after the first few guys. But once you got to like Bald Bull, I mean, it was starting to get difficult to figure out the pattern. But once you know that once the camera flashes in the crowd that he's going to do his little bounce, and when that camera flashes on that bounce, you swing right when that camera flashes and you knock him straight out. It's like, oh, this is not so hard. And each one has a little tick like that. A little thing that happens that exposes the opponent's weakness, but if you don't know about it, then you can't utilize it. So our job is to teach people to know about how to overcome these things in life. And that's where the Bloom class and the Foundations class come in so critical. And then, okay, let's just say they're not going to stay in Bloom and Foundations class forever. It's ridiculous, right? It's no longer going to be challenging. It's like playing Mario 64 over and over and over again. Once you've beat it a bunch of times, it's going to be boring. Well, then that's when we move them into Dr. Norm's class. We move the Bloom people out into here, where they're a little bit more challenged, where they're pushed. So this is a mechanism we have been wrestling to get in place for many years, and we're getting close to the place where we're going to start being able to apply this thing, bring people in, and have an area to put them no matter their level. And that's exciting. It's exciting to have the mechanisms in place where somebody fresh off the street, no matter what their condition, we can put them in a class that's slow enough for them to where they can learn when the camera flashes. Yeah, Steve, is this just a quick question or do you need the mic? Okay. Absolutely. Well, the fact is, I'll say this. I just finished reading a book, and I tell you what, I don't often recommend books that have some weirdness in them, but this book is called The Jesus Revolution. It's put together by Roger Sachs, and it is Lonnie Frisbee's firsthand testimony of his life in the Jesus movement. As a matter of fact, Caleb, I was going to loan you this. I'm going to loan you this, but I want it back because I've got a rotation I'm going to put it on. But because you're so passionate about that subject, I wanted to loan it to you. And but pick that book up if you can. I don't think there's any digital versions available. It's pretty rudimentary. Okay, so it is on Kindle. So there are digital versions available. That is the second edition, so it's been out for a little while. It's actually a 3-part book. I'm not going to recommend the other 2 yet because I haven't read them. I'm in the midst of reading them. But Lonnie was a very complex man. He had some very complex sin issues. But he wrestled with them, and he was able to overcome them and had a deathbed confession, just 100% honest. In 1993, Lonnie died of AIDS due to homosexual relationships. And it was something he loathed and hated about himself. He was never like, oh, this is okay, God's okay with it. He's very candid, very honest about how it happened, why he hated it, why he wanted to overcome it. But yet in the middle of it all, on those times where he had this connection with God and he was free from those devices, God used him in the most unusual way. It's just amazing. That story is incredible. So I do highly recommend the first one, Jesus Revolution by Lonnie Frisbee and Roger Sachs. Incredible. But making disciples, and he talks about all this stuff. He talks about deliverance, and he talks about the need for discipleship, and he talks about the lack of it in a lot of the Jesus movement waves in the different churches. So anyhow, our job is not to make converts, it is to make disciples. Yes?
Just to add, a big portion of discipleship is going to be us being connected, us finding those individuals who come in through the doors and being willing to connect.
Yeah, you're talking way too long. Go ahead and repeat it.
Yeah, filibuster. But A big portion of discipleship is going to be spending time with individuals outside of church, outside of the main services where you can have those one-on-one conversations and really interact. And that's where you're going to figure out what people are struggling with behind the scenes. It's
Right.
not just going to be a altar call type
And
of
it's
thing.
one of the things the Jesus movement went into error on, because they a lot of them went into communes where they were living in these big homes and they would buy hotels and they would all live together. And I'm not saying communal living is necessarily wrong. I'm just saying that's where a lot of it went wrong. So, communal living, there are some nations that's very normal for them. For us in America, that would be kind of odd. And it was considered odd back in the 60s when this happened. They would live in these big communes, and they would just take people off the street. And, there's some danger to that, especially when you have a family with children. We got to be wise. But the point is still well taken, is the church didn't just do church together. They did life together. And that's going to be a key to discipleship. And I'm not talking about doing life together by meeting in a brick and mortar building every day. But it's kind of like raising kids. Moms and dads don't just make babies and then, okay, good luck. No, they raise them to a certain level of maturity where they're able to then go out on their own and survive. And it's the same with the body of Christ. We can't just go across the street and share the gospel with people and say, okay, good luck. We've got to create opportunities to spend time with them so that we can raise them up until they reach maturity and are able to function on their own. So I do believe that's one thing the Jesus movement really emphasized and had a good idea. It's just because of the culture, especially the hippie culture, which was largely what was being reached during the Jesus movement. It's also where things went terribly wrong. And they were doing drugs. There's a video of David Wilkerson confronting the Jesus people, and they're talking about how it's okay to do drugs because, no big deal. And that wasn't the position of all of them, and it certainly wasn't the position of Calvary Chapel, Lonnie Frisbee, and that movement. But still, you can see how it can get convoluted. And if a small segment believes it and it gets national attention, guess what's going to happen to the whole? The whole is going to be accused of that same error. So, and we're going to be accused of error no matter what by those that want to criticize us. I'm not that concerned about that. I just don't want to be in error, which is really what happened with that movement. So he said, make disciples. So this is important. Make people of discipline. Make people of level 4 deliverance. We're walking in discipline, and they're walking in freedom. Remember, whom the Son sets free is free indeed. And that is the goal of salvation. It's not just to get them to an altar. That would be just like the goal of a wedding, or the goal of the marriage would be just the wedding. Right? You just get married, and okay, that's it, I'll see you. No, that's not how marriage works. You live together. You make a family together. You grow. And it's the same with the church. Let's just say that through our efforts this summer, we see 25 people come to know Christ. That means the church just gave birth to 25 babies that we're responsible for and that we're going to need to. Now, thank God, today through technology, things are a whole lot easier than they used to be. We can check on them on a regular basis through text messaging, FaceTime, telephone calls, and Facebook, and all sorts of other things. I'm not saying those are replacements. I'm just saying it is a little bit simpler than it used to be to stay connected with people than it was years ago. Because before, you just had to get together in the same place. There was no other option. So then he goes on, after he says, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey, or teaching them to observe all things I've commanded. Lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Now I want to go back to Steve's point, where he said they have to be hungry. And I've been contemplating that. I've been thinking hard about what do we do with the lack of hunger. And one thing and that's what led me to talk about that book. There's a line in that book that has really stood out with me. Anybody ever read something or heard something that's like, I'm never going to forget that? That's kind of what this was. It was one of those I'm never going to forget that moments. And he said, Jesus called us to be fishers of men, which is the Bible, right? He said, but the bait is his presence. And I started contemplating that, and I was like, that is accurate. You want to see somebody's hunger get stirred up, let them encounter the presence of the living God. And ever since then, that's just kind of been the drive for me. Is there anything wrong with giveaways? Is there anything wrong with food and different things to entice people? Jesus did it, right? He fed 5,000 in the wilderness. He did some things to kind of entice people to come. But, well, at least the second time, when they came the second time for food, he actually said, oh, you come for food, but you don't really want to hear what I have to say. So Jesus is like, you know what, you want my benefits, but you don't want my presence. So, Steve, to answer your question, there are going to be some people that want nothing to do with God, no matter what. His presence can be thick in the room, and they just don't want anything to do with it. But I'm here to tell you, you get this place filled with the presence of God. You get this place filled with Holy Ghost power. And you get the presence of God obvious in our lives to where we are seeing the book of Acts played out. And you're going to see a hunger in people you didn't see a hunger in. And I think the presence of God will really merit 3 reactions. One of them is curiosity. Right? What did Moses do when he saw the burning bush? I'm going to go check out, see what this bush doesn't burn. Right? Curiosity. I think it was John Wesley that said, let God set me on fire and people will come for miles to watch me burn. In other words, there's something about a spectacle. Even if it's God doing it. Even if it's blind eyes opening or some kind of supernatural event that just draws people. Right? Not necessarily the hungry, just people. So that's one reaction, is curiosity. The second reaction, I would say, is hostility. A pharisaical spirit. Where people come in and they try to accredit it to the works of the devil. We've heard that before from Christians, right? Well, that's the works of the devil. Now, sometimes it ends up playing out to where the church is in error, and that's just unfortunate, right? But ultimately, we know that God can move. But then the other is a hunger. It wakes up something inside of a person. And I'll tell you, the greatest encounter of God I ever had in my life was at, I can't remember if it was a kids camp or a youth camp. I can't remember which one. But the greatest encounter of God I've ever had in my life was at a camp service in Camp Crestwood. And we would do pre-service prayer. As a matter of fact, we do pre-service prayer on Sundays. We do the whole design of why I believe so strongly in pre-service prayer is because the encounter I had at Camp Crestwood. And we were having pre-service prayer. Everything was super normal. We were praying, doing a super normal thing. It didn't seem like anything extraordinary was going to happen that day. And then when they lifted the curtain, because they had a curtain that kind of covered, kind of like a theater stage. When they lifted the curtain, it was like the glory was back there. And it just swooped into the room, and then just everyone was in tears. I mean, this was not choreographed. This was like, boom. And it was probably an hour before the musicians could even minister because the glory was so thick. And I will never forget that experience. That was life-changing for me. And it's like nothing else is satisfying to me. I know what that looks like now. And it created a hunger and a desire because I experienced the glory and the presence of God. Now we've had touches and we've had some awesome things, but I have never in my existence, I listened to John Kilpatrick preach. I listened during his heyday. When the Brownsville revival was thick. I listened to Steve Hill preach when the Brownsville revival was thick. I experienced Lyndall Cooley leading worship while the Brownsville revival was thick and heavy. Never have I encountered anything like at a camp full of either kids or teenagers, can't remember which one, in Crestwood, Kentucky. Never have I experienced glory like that. And I mean, it was an amazing service. There was healings. It was wild. And I have a feeling, this is just my suspicion, that if we were to have encounters like that, that hunger wouldn't be an issue. They would either A, come just out of curiosity and then they would be gone, or B, they would be hostile. This is of the devil. Or 3, there would be, and I think we draw 3, right? We draw 3. We draw the critics. We draw the curious, but we'd also draw the hungry. And then that's when you see change. So the bait to the fish is presence. That's a line in that book I'll never, ever forget. And that is what drives me. That is why I do what I do. I want to see the presence of God manifest to a level that I saw it at camp. And I'm going to say even greater, because I guarantee you there's even a greater level. Now, I don't think that we could function like that every service. Obviously, it's silly to think that, every time the service starts, we can't even minister. But to have those now and then to drive us and to fuel us, that is something I long for. And to have a real, tangible presence. Because one thing I have watched probably every Brownsville revival service available online. There's probably not one I've missed. I've watched the entire documentary. I've watched all the services that I can find. And one thing that John Kilpatrick said that stood out to me, and I'm kind of all over the place tonight, but one thing John Kilpatrick said that stood out to me is they were having the building service. I can't remember if it was like for bugs or for some sort of equipment. I can't remember exactly what they were servicing the building for, but the person that came in was not a believer. He walks into the building, and they talk, and he says, "You need you to go into sanctuary, and you're going to do such and such and so and so." And the guy goes in there, and the next thing you know, the John Kilpatrick hears, and he walks in there, and the guy is up against the wall. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And he's just kind of scurrying against the wall. And then he kind of takes the door frame, and he comes on the outside, and then he kind of relaxes, and he said, "What is in there?" What is in there? And he said, "Oh, that's just the glory of God." That's what I want to see. When somebody walks in this room, they're like, "What is in here?" I don't even want a contractor to be coming in and lay carpet without, what is in here? What is that presence that is in here? I'm telling you, that is what will drive people. That's what will fuel the hunger that cannot be satisfied in people outside of Jesus. So, I guess that kind of answers that question, is just to be people of presence. Yes? Yeah, you're talking too long. Hold on. Because I don't want the internet to be confused.
But I think Satan has gotten people and families convinced that they're living in sin and they are not good enough to come to church, and they're not going to be forgiven. And the ones that are paying the price is the children.
Right.
But it's hard for us to get every child in church.
Right.
I mean, just my example, like right now, I've got Kinsley here, and I'll bring Sky, but Mom and Dad won't come.
Right.
And I try to get them to come. But their sin is keeping them from coming to church. And I know in my family it's happening, and I know thousands of families is going around in E-Town. It's the same situation.
Yeah, we are on the internet, by the way.
Oh, it's okay. I'll pray for them. I do pray for them. I love E-Town. I wish they would come here.
But yeah, I think that's one of the big hindrances is that people think, well, I can't come. But you can just sit in the chair in front of you. I can't come because I have sin in my life. And the way to address that is similar to the way that Jesus addressed the woman at the well. He did not deny her sin. Matter of fact, Jesus was kind of hood. He said, "Go and get your husband." Wow. He said, "Well, I don't have a husband." He's like, "You're right that you don't have a husband. As a matter of fact, you've had 7 husbands, and the guy that you have now is not your husband." Whoa. Whoa. That's pretty intense. Right? But because of who Jesus was, and plus the encounter that the woman had before that point, where Jesus, he didn't address her sin right away, right? He said, "Hey, come, draw me some water." And then when they had this dialogue, he said, "Well, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for living water." And then they had this whole conversation. "Why are you, a Jewish man, talking to me, a Samaritan woman? That's not allowed. You're not supposed to do this. We're repulsive in your eyes." So just by the fact that Jesus was able to have a conversation with her based on her ethnicity being different than him, at that time was really a measure of love that broke down those walls and then gave him permission to address her sin. And see, we want to flip it on its head, don't we? We want to address the sin, and then, yeah, well, I'm doing this in love. See, love gives us permission to address sin. What does the Bible say? Speak the truth in love. Right? If you don't speak the truth in love, what does it sound like? Hatred. Something I used to say way more often than I do now is never tell your friend they're going to hell without tears in your eyes. They need to see your love. If you're saying you're going to hell in some sort of anger, that is not the gospel. Now, if you're telling them that you love them and you care about them and I don't want you to go to hell, hell is a very real place. We're not in denial, right? But it all needs to be based on love. He said they'll know you're my disciples, my followers, by your love for one another. Love is a critical and key component to evangelism. And God is love, so his presence is going to be love as well. But love has been so distorted and perverted to mean today acceptance of anything and tolerance of anything. And I don't want to get off on this tangent again, but there's a certain segment of society, if you don't agree with them, then they tell you you hate them, that you're an intolerant bigot. And it's like, if I hated you, I would not care enough to have this conversation with you. Why on earth would I be taking the bullets and getting you all mad and offended at me if I could avoid this? I mean, I'd much rather avoid it, right? Leave them to their devices and let them. Why do I want to be attacked? Simply because I have a different opinion. And I have a family member. His name is Brett, and he and I are on total opposite ends of not only the political spectrum, but the definition of man and woman and all these things. We are polar opposites. But we are wonderful friends. Matter of fact, on the 19th or 28th, we're going to have lunch together because he wants to talk to me about some of this stuff. Now, that's wild. And the thing is, we're both adults, and we both understand that disagreement doesn't mean I hate you. And it's such a powerful relationship because, I have more compassion because of him. I used to be a little more cut and dry about things, but now because I listen to his heart and I hear the pain that some of these people are going through, it doesn't change my opinion, but it changes the way I have a conversation with them. Does that make sense? I'm more like the woman at the well, or Jesus with the woman at the well. I'm more concerned with their well-being to get them to that living water than about addressing the fact that, hey, the dude that you're living with now isn't your husband. And see, a lot of charismatic, Pentecostal, old school, fire-breathing preachers would tend to want to address the sin. And I believe their motive was love, but it just didn't show. And what did Jesus offer to meet? A very physical need. Right? Water. Come to me and I'll give you living water. You'll never get thirsty again. Now, he didn't tell her he was talking about spiritual water, but he woke up her hope that, hey, I want to come out here and this well over and over again. And then that's when he began to apply it in the Spirit and then began to address her sin. And what's interesting is he was also operating in the prophetic, because what did she say? I perceive that you are a prophet. Because she didn't tell him how many husbands she had had. So that's another thing that God will use is the prophetic. He'll use love, he'll use the prophetic, and he'll use presence. And see, Jesus had all three there. He loved the woman, he operated in the prophetic with her, and then he was present. I just think those things are key. So now, with that said, teaching and obey, I'm always with you. Presence, that is key. Lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. That is critical. That's a critical part of the Great Commission that often goes unshared. We hear a lot of people talk about all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. We have a lot of people talk about go, go, go. And by the way, that word go does not mean pick up something and go someplace. It literally means in your daily life, in what you're doing, in your going. The literal is in your going. In other words, wherever you go, make disciples. And whatever you do, make disciples. In your workplace, in your family, in your house. And of course, there are also times to evangelize those you don't know, which we'll talk about in a minute when we talk about the levels of evangelism. So now let's go to 1 Timothy 4:5, and this is kind of the driving verse. This is going to be the theme of the next few months as we move into this topic. Now, I'm not going to jump immediately into the evangelism on Sunday morning because we've still got a couple of things to sew up. We've got a children's service coming up in August, so it'll be the week after Children's Sunday that we really start breaking this down. But 1 Timothy 4:5, it says, "For it is sanctified by the word of God and prayer." I don't believe that is right. Hold on. Yeah, try that. Try 2 Timothy 4:5. 2 Timothy 4:5. Oh, only thing I say is oops. All right. Be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. Does anybody know who wrote this? The Apostle Paul. Who was he writing to? What was Timothy? He was a pastor. So was Timothy an evangelist? So Timothy was not an evangelist, yet he was not excused from the work of evangelism. No one is excused. There are those that are gifted in evangelism. That is their calling, that is their purpose, that is the office they walk in. They love it, they eat it, they sleep it, they breathe it. That's all they think about. Those are gifted people. And they do evangelism because of what they are. But you could plug in other words here. Do the work of someone who extends mercy. Right? Well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to change the Word of God. But what I'm saying is there are several things that some people are gifted at, but everyone is responsible to do. Because just because some people are gifted in mercy, just especially gifted in mercy, does that mean that the rest of us just have an excuse to be unmerciful? It's just not my gift. I get to be mean, I get to be a jerk, I get to be unforgiving because it's just not my gift. And it's wonderful for someone that's specifically gifted in a certain area, right? Because they can come in maybe when you're weak in an area and really help you along, because mercy is not a strength of mine. It's not something that my first inclination is to criticize, to correct. And when I say criticize, we often use criticizing as a negative thing. It's not always negative. Yeah, sometimes criticism is just to bring correction. And that is my first inclination. Kids come to me with a problem, we're going to sit down, we're going to write out a plan, this is how we're going to overcome this thing. I don't want a plan, I just want an ear. Well, go to your mom. And that can be detrimental. Because sometimes people don't want advice. They know what to do. They know what's right. They know what they did wrong. They even know how to avoid it. But for some reason they keep falling. They just need someone to listen. Someone to extend some mercy. Someone to hug them and tell them, you know what, I'm going to pray for you and you're going to overcome this. You know, sometimes it's okay to give advice. But that's just my first inclination. My first inclination, okay, here's the battle strategy. Here's what we're going to do. Okay, come on, get out the pieces here. Here's the map. And we're going to blah, 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 and you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And boom, bam, you're going to win. But it's not always that clean. Life is not always that clean. So sometimes we just need to extend mercy, to show compassion. I'm not naturally compassionate. But does that mean I don't have to be compassionate? No, it's silly. And I am not naturally an evangelist. That's not my nature. I'm not the person that's like, let's go to the streets and win people for Jesus. I'll lead the way. Come on, have you thought about Jesus today? Can I talk to you? It's not natural for me. Number one, I'm not a naturally bubbly, outgoing kind of person. I'm one of those you got to get to know me kind of people. You didn't have to agree so quick. But it's just not my personality. Does that mean, okay, well, I'm just not an evangelist, so we'll just let the evangelist do the evangelist and I'll do something different? No. Paul told Timothy, do the work of an evangelist. So there's evangelism as an office and a gift. Those are two different things. There are some people that have evangelism as an office. That's what they are. They are an evangelist. That is specifically how God wired them. And see, what is the difference between someone who is gifted in evangelism and someone who carries the office of evangelism?
The one who carries the office is supposed to equip others.
There you go. So the one who carries the office is the equipper. Now, does that mean he gets to sit on his behind? No, equipping means you get out there and you train and you teach. You're doing it with people. You're leading the way. Those with the gift of evangelism are those where it's just kind of natural for them, to where when you plug in evangelist into the situation, it's just like they just gravitate toward that person. And we've got people in this church with that skill set that will gravitate toward the office of evangelism once we get that dialed fully in. And I believe that God is beginning to bring that together between Quincy and Caleb. They are both really passionate about that area. And I think we're going to start seeing some things happen. Because one thing that we have learned is that when you do it, people will respond. I'd say someone who's gifted in that area is Sydney. He's just a natural with people. We take him out. He's just natural and talking. It's amazing how natural he is at it. And I guarantee there's more than that. And for me, street ministry is hard, which we'll get to that in a minute. Let me not get out of order here. But do the work of an evangelist. So all of us are called to do the work of an evangelist. But not all of us are going to be that bubbly, outgoing person that's willing to walk up and talk to a stranger and say, "Sir, how are you doing today?" And then they make small talk with them and, "Hey, can I talk to you about my Jesus?" There's something that's not natural for them. It takes a lot of effort. So we want to create entryways for people where that's not natural for them, to where you can be part of the evangelistic ministry of Lakeside, but not necessarily have to do cold calls. Yeah, somebody's phone's going off, but that's okay. All right, so evangelism is in 4 levels. Oh, by the way, in Matthew 28, 18 through 20, who was Jesus talking to? 500 people. And how do we know that? The Apostle Paul confirmed it in one of the Corinthians. There were 500 people present. So he was not talking to 12 folks. He's talking to 500 folks of all walks of life. Some of them not even leadership, telling them, go into all the world and make disciples. So this is the responsibility of the church, of God's people, not just these elite spiritual folks. So with that said, number 1 level of evangelism is what I would call marketplace ministry. And this is, in my mind, the easiest level of evangelism that anyone can do. Because what is marketplace ministry? That is where you go set up somewhere, like a park or a place where people are prone to hang out, and we just gather, and some people that have that gift of evangelism will talk to people and share the gospel with people, and the rest of us, we're manning the tables, we're giving away gifts, we're passing out popcorn. See, what we're doing is there's a thing in football called running back by committee. And what that means is we don't have a great running back. We don't have a 4-down guy. But we've got a bunch of guys that if we put them in for a down or 2, they can get the job done. So they may run 4 or 5 running backs. So then this is kind of evangelism by committee, where everybody is joining in and you get the job done. So where it may not be your specific gift, you may not be extremely good at it, but you can pass out popcorn, you can make cotton candy. There are certain things that you can do where you can be contributing to the ministry and the work of evangelism without necessarily having to engage in something that you're super uncomfortable with. Now, in order for this to function, you do have to have the office of evangelism firing. There has to be someone pioneering it. There has to be someone behind it. And you do have to take some people there that have that skill. Or you're just going to be giving out popcorn and food and then going home. And then we accomplish nothing. Which is really a lot of what happens in marketplace ministry. Is no one ever shares the gospel. And what we're going to try to do is on the 22nd of this month, which is a Saturday, correct? Is we're going to try to do a marketplace. But we're going to do it here as kind of a dry run. And it's going to be at the pavilion. Now, last time we did this, we had some pretty good success. I was surprised with how many people showed up to this thing. And it actually produced some short-term fruit, where some people actually came to church the following Sunday. So the plan is on the 22nd, we're going to have a barbecue. There is a sign-up out in the foyer. Please make sure you sign up. We need people there, and we also need people to bring food. Okay, because we're going to do the bait, right? But the ultimate bait has to be presence. The presence of God needs to be there with us. So that's what we're going to be praying for. We're going to be praying that God shows up in our situation to where even the food bank, you want to talk about an incredible opportunity for evangelism. Now, there's a lot of people there that go to a church, and that's fine, but there's a lot of people there that don't. So my prayer is just that the presence of God just invades that place. That there's an undeniable presence every time the food bank gathers. And the people are like, what's in here? Or they take the food home, and they're like, okay, somebody, what's wrong with this food? Every time I eat it, I feel like I need to stop doing such and such. Well, that's because we prayed over that food. That's because the presence of God is working through the bait. Because if the purpose of the food bank is not to get people to stage 4 of deliverance, why are we doing it? As a matter of fact, the purpose of anything that we do is not to get people to stage 4 of deliverance. Why are we doing it? The purpose of that food bank is to see people set free. Matter of fact, I would like to see that food bank get people to the place to where they are starting to receive, but then they are giving over time. Because in the American system, we've created the system of dependence where people don't want freedom because they know the government will take care of them. And we've got to break that thinking. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with, say, an elderly person that's on a fixed income to come to the food bank for the rest of their life. That's wonderful. That's what it's designed for. But there are also people there that need to be set free. They're young. They're too young to be in this level of need. And we're going to serve them. We're going to help them. But the goal is to get them free. But that is an incredible opportunity for evangelism. And we just need God to show up, manifest in that situation. And I believe it's going to start in this room. And then it's going to spread to everything that we do. Because first we've got to win the room. What did the Bible say? Let's see, they're all in one place, all in one accord, and the Spirit of God came upon them. I want to say it filled the room. And it filled the room where they were sitting. Yeah, there it is. It filled the room where they were sitting. So this is where I want to start. I want to start in this room. Where we fill this room up, and then it just oozes out. And then when people come to the food bank, they can't even pull into the parking lot without recognizing a tangible and real presence. And when they receive from us, it's life-changing. God provided manna in the desert. You know, God's not afraid to feed people. There's nothing wrong with helps ministries. But I want to see the presence of God. So marketplace ministry. I would even say the food bank is kind of a form of marketplace ministry. People gather, and you don't have to be particularly good at sharing Jesus. You just care about people. And you give them food and meet their needs. I'm telling you, it's amazing what meeting basic needs of people, what windows and doors those will open for the presence of God. So marketplace ministry, and we're going to start trying to do some different levels of that. We're not going to do them all on campus. You know, Haycraft Park, and we've talked about several different communities and places that we want to go and really do some marketplace ministry where we set up and just meet needs of people. And just care about them. And this is level 1, and it's wonderful because, again, everyone can do the work of evangelist. Level 2, this one's a little bit tougher, but it's still doable for everyone. Everyone can still do this. Level 2 is simply inviting someone to an event designed to see them come to know Jesus. Show up Sunday, for example. And we'll be doing a level of that when we do our community barbecue. We're just inviting them to something. Hey, won't you come sit with me in church this Sunday? Or, hey, we're going to be having a dinner. We're going to be having a Passover dinner. Or we're going to be having a Sukkot dinner. We're going to be doing this. We're going to be doing that. Why don't you come and join me? And see, my concern is when you talk about sharing your faith, I'm going to say probably over 90% of American Christians think that that's sharing your faith. Inviting someone to come to church. And, well, that's not the case. That's not sharing your faith, because we're going to talk about that too. Because I do believe everyone has a responsibility to share your faith. But, and again, it gets a little more difficult as we go up a level. So this actually requires overcoming your nerves and actually talking to a person, which is not natural for some people. And one easier way to do this is just via text message, because what we do on Show Up Sundays, we will try to make available through our church app and on Facebook and through text messaging, through those of you that have that easily, send you just a little image that says Show Up Sunday, and then you can just text that to somebody. See, that's something anyone can do, but anyone can actually walk up to their neighbor and say, hey, I'd like to invite you to church on Sunday. And that's it. Then you've done level 2. Now, you haven't shared the gospel, but that's still part of the ministry of evangelism. That's doing the work of an evangelist. So level 1 is we show up in an event, and some people do the work, and some people share the gospel. And then we all get credit because we did it as a family, right? And the second one's a little more individual. It's a little more difficult. It requires a personal invitation. It actually requires a conversation with somebody. And it will spoil the fact that you are a Christian. Is this a long one or a short one?
Short.
Okay, go ahead.
It's sort of like Philip in the Bible when he tells, I think it's Nathaniel to come and see.
Come and see. Yeah,
See what we have.
right. Yeah, that's a good example. When we say come and see. And yeah, come and see is level 2. I like that. Marketplace ministry and come and see. Personal invitation is a little easier to understand, but I like come and see as well. So this one is slightly more difficult, but it's still pretty easy. You're talking 30 seconds of pain if this is just something that makes you horrified, horrifically nervous. Right, 30 seconds of pain. Hey, can you, hey, I'd like to invite you, and we even let some people be extra chicken and just stick it on their neighbor's door. You know, work your way up, right? This is a no-guilt thing. There is no wrong way to try to win people to Jesus. Even if it's simply sticking something on the door and inviting them. We've done that before. Now, I personally think that personal invitation works best within the context of a relationship. Everybody in this room has at least 5 people in your life you know that do not know Jesus. And I believe it is our responsibility to personally invite them to be part of our faith. And we do this in several ways. First of all, we pray for them. We do this in 5 ways. So before you personally invite them, I would suggest you do these things. Number 1, you pray for them. Don't talk to your friends about Jesus until you've talked to Jesus about your friends. Number 2 is you serve them. Serve them. Do something nice for them. For example, my neighbor Bob mows grass. I've invited him to church a few times. He has no interest. His family, they go, but he wants to sleep on Sunday mornings. And he makes no bones about it. He just doesn't care. But I'm going to keep mowing his grass. Because what that does, it gives me permission to talk to him about my faith. And Bob almost died a couple years ago with a heart issue. And, you know, when his surgery was successful, I was like, Bob, you know, how much longer do you think you have? What are you going to do about your eternity? And, you know, it's just like most Christians or people in the world, oh, you know, I know God and I believe God and this and that. You know. But I'm believing that this act of serving, this act of kindness. Another thing that we do is with our immediate neighbors, every time we get a harvest of blackberries, we take them a jar. We just here's a jar of blackberries that we got out of our garden for you. And also every Christmas, every holiday, we'll give them chocolates and candies. Just ways to be nice to them, just to serve them. Because then I think that legitimizes your goodness. The Bible says, let them see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So that's the first thing. Pray for them. Number 1, serve them. And then be a generous person. Always be willing to help. If your neighbor needs help, help them. For example, Bob. And sometimes I have to admit I'm busy and I'm in a hurry, and I see Bob out there, and he's doing this looking for me. I'm like, oh, what's he want now? Can you replace the batteries in my smoke detector? Because Bob's about 4'9". You know, he can't reach anything. And, you know, look at me, I'm 6'3". So every couple times a year, I'll go and throughout his whole house and replace all the batteries. Because he doesn't have any kids. He has a daughter, and she has cerebral palsy. So she's unable to help. And his wife, her hands are seized, so she's not much able to help either. I'm all he has. And I just believe Bob's going to come to know Jesus but the thing is, there's going to come a point where he has to be willing to listen to the gospel. faith has to be shared. But what's going on here? Is that me or is that the microphone? Is it on? Yeah, turned off. It may be that. Yeah. All right. So level 2 is personal invitation, or as Caleb said, come and see. Level 3, this is hard. Okay? This is hard. And it's personal witnessing. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't give you all the rest of them, did I? Pray, and then serve, give, in other words, be generous, and then live. Fourth one is live a consistent Christian life. Take care of your yard. Be a good example. Don't park in front of their mailbox. Don't do silly things. Don't block their drive when you have people over, which I did by mistake once and had to write a letter of an apology to my neighbor. Literally apologized to him because I put it there temporarily, went in the living room, fell asleep. It was the day my grandfather died, and I had a million excuses, but still it wasn't okay. I blocked his driveway. And I wanted him to know, hey, this isn't part of my character. I'm sorry. And we patched it up. Just be a good example. Be a good example of what it means to be Christ-like. Don't be yelling at your kids and fighting with your wife and, all these things. And then the last one is where we get to level 3, and that's tell. So first we pray, then we serve, then we give, and then we live, and then lastly we tell. And that's when you tell them about your faith in Jesus. St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. There always comes a point where it's necessary. I get the point he was trying to make. He was saying, pray, serve, give, live, and then tell. Because folks, if you're not generous, if you're not helpful, if you don't care, if you don't show any love, and you don't shine your light, you never do anything for them, you're always hiding in the house, you're unfriendly, and then you invite someone, they're not going to want what you have. They need to see these things in your life. So then level 3 is personal witnessing. This is telling a family or a friend about your faith in Jesus. This is sharing the gospel. And we're going to make it our aim to equip everyone in this church to know how to share the gospel effectively. Now, we can't do anything with your nerves, and we can't make you gifted in this area. But what we can do is help you become equipped to share the gospel, to share your testimony, to share your story. And sometimes that means avoiding overtly religious language that people may not understand in this culture. Have you been washed in the blood? That's how I got introduced to Jesus. I'm not even kidding. Have you been washed in the blood? And I was like, I don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound like that's something I'd want to do. Huh? Or saved, yeah, or even sinner. So we're going to get together with people that are skilled in this area, and we're going to come up with a roadmap to where hopefully everyone will at least be able to be equipped with a few verses and some things that they can share in order to effectively share the gospel, and then to kind of string together, because I think one of the key components of the gospel is not just sharing the facts of the gospel, but sharing how it's changed you. Sharing how it's transformed you. Because what did the woman at the well do? She went out in the city and said, come and see a man that told me everything about myself. They saw a changed woman. So there's something about seeing the gospel take root and bring change in people's lives that really cements it. And we may not say, come and see a man that told me everything about myself. But we say, hey, I want to talk to you about Jesus, and this is what he did for me. For me, I used to be a drug addict, and I was set free. But see, that's telling your testimony is not enough. You have to give them the gospel as well. And that's not as hard as it sounds. But this is definitely difficult because this is when Satan's like, oh no, we don't want this. And you're starting to get some real serious resistance. Satan didn't give me no problems mowing Mr. Bob's lawn. He didn't give me any problems replacing his smoke detector batteries. But when that window opens for him to hear the gospel, you better know Satan's going to be there trying to stop it at every step. See, Paul said pray for us to have an open door for the gospel. So the gospel only works when the door is open. as Steve was mentioning earlier, unless there's a hunger. We can't force people to hear the gospel. So marketplace ministry, personal invitation, personal witnessing. Sharing your personal story about what Jesus did to you, and then coupling that with the gospel. And if you're not extroverted, this is very difficult. See, I am an introverted extrovert. I am okay being around people as long as I'm comfortable with them. But you take me in a circumstance where I don't know people, and you put me in there, I'm not going to be in charge of the room. I'm not going to take over the room. I'm going to melt into the wall. So I have some introverted tendencies. So it's not natural for me to go into unfamiliar circumstances, both guns blazing, saying, let's take over the joint. It's just not my personality. Now I am okay with it once I get to know people and I've got some people helping me, then I can be a little more bold. But up until that point, I can be a bit backward in that setting. So personal witnessing, this is telling a friend or family member specifically. Okay, this is not cold calls. And anyone can do this. And I believe that this is part of the work of an evangelist. So I think everyone's responsible to help the church and marketplace ministry. Everyone's responsible to personally invite people to things where they could potentially get saved. And everyone is responsible at some point to tell those under their influence about their faith. I don't think anyone gets off the hook for that. And each level is harder, I will admit. But level 4 is the most difficult, and I don't think level 4 is for everyone. If this isn't your gift mix, then this is something some people can bow out on, and that is street ministry. Street ministry is going out into places, neighborhoods, and the purpose of it is specifically to pray for people and to share Jesus with them. That's the purpose. And you don't know them. And I don't know about you, but when I do that, I'm nervous. I'm like, whew, yeah. Well, that's how we start. We've done a couple of slow starts with just a few people, and that's how we start. But even that, yeah, well, that may be your gift. That may be a natural inclination that you have. But not everybody does. My wife doesn't even like talking to someone on the phone she doesn't know. She has me do it. I mean, like to get a job done, to, telemarketer or whatever. Hey, can you call? I'm like, is your voice broke? You're just better at it. So, and I don't mind that. I don't mind talking to people about getting business done. And like I said, certain situations, I'm like Rambo. Let's get this done. In other situations, I'm a chicken.
So typically the acts for prayer is the window. If they say no, that's when you can just give them the invitation to the event. But if they say yes, that is your opportunity to share Jesus, because they have to understand who you're praying to, what we're believing for, what promise are we standing on. Like, say if we ring a doorbell and the person is sick, that's where you can bring out that he died for our wholeness and pray along those lines. But if they say no, that's when you just say, hey, here's an invitation, it's a barbecue, and you keep it moving.
Yeah, and when they say no, you don't take it personally. Because they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting your message. So I don't expect everyone to participate in this. As a matter of fact, I'm going to say that the majority of Christians in America don't participate in any of this. When you have a marketplace ministry event, we may have 30 people show up. Personal invitation, I don't know how many people do it. I do it, and it can be uncomfortable. Personal witnessing, that's a tough one. That's a tough one for a lot of people, and that's something that we've got to get over the hump and do. We've got to share Jesus with our friends in the street ministry. Not everyone's going to do this, and I don't expect everyone. If we could get a team of 12 to do street ministry, I'd probably be pretty satisfied with that. To just go out and this actually requires an evangelist on site as well. You have to have that office leading the situation. You can't just have a bunch of guys named Bob that don't have a gift in evangelism or are gifted in evangelism, no sense of direction. There has to be a trailblazer. There has to be someone that says, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, or you're going to have a disorganized mess. Because again, what is the purpose of the office of evangelist? To equip the people to do the work of the ministry, and part of equipping them is leading them. So, street ministry is difficult. There's a reason that it's not done. As a matter of fact, I used to think it didn't work, but I think I just learned it's difficult. So let me go over the 4 levels again. You're going to be hearing a lot of this over the next several months. Number 1 is marketplace. It's the easiest one. There's no reason everyone can't contribute, because that's all you got to do is show up. Sitting behind a popcorn machine, you hand people a bag of popcorn. You have participated in the work of an evangelist, right? Anyone can do that. Just show up. That's all you got to do. Then I would suggest that you pray. Prepare as well. Personal invitation, a little bit more difficult, but anyone can do it. Just hand somebody 30 seconds of nerves, and whew, okay, that's over with. I invited them, thank God. And you've got to be convincing. You can't go Eeyore and, oh, I'd like to invite you to church. You have to look at least like you're interested. Third thing is personal witnessing. It's a little tougher, but everyone can do it. Then the last one is not for everyone. And that's street ministry. As a matter of fact, I would say it would be detrimental for some people if they were to do it. It would not be good for them. It would not be helpful for them. So that's my thoughts in a nutshell. Some questions that we answered in the home group was, why do you think the ministry and work of evangelism is so difficult for American Christians? Why do we feel it's so hard? And then the second question was, what can we do as a church to better equip our people to do the work of an evangelist? So those are the questions okay, Andrew.
So actually, my home group, we discussed this, and an answer for, I guess, I think the question was, what training do we need? And I think that ultimately we saw the most productiveness from being a friend to somebody and kind of sharing in the context of that friendship. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we were thinking of what training do we need, what we came up with was on how to be a friend and just being a friend to people.
Right. And that would mean that probably those that showed up to your home group probably don't have the gift of evangelism. So they would just get to level 3, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with people getting to level 3 to where their highest level of evangelism is sharing Jesus within the context of a relationship. That's amazing. If we could get most Christians doing that, we could take a city. And again, not everyone is going to be level 4.
Something that we discussed, and I believe it was Caleb Erizer who mentioned the idea of not having the correct deflect tactics. Say your first thing and a person wants to question you, and feeling like you don't know enough to evangelize to them can often be a barrier. And that is where when you step outside of 1 and 2, that's where it's really going to show whether or not there's an evangelist in the church equipping the saints.
Yes.
Because if there's no equipping, you don't have to be equipped to pass out drinks or popcorn. But when you begin to express your faith, you don't want to just start in Genesis and work all the way to Revelation. Yeah. There's certain tactics. So that's where the evangelist is supposed to pour into people.
Right.
To
and
teach them how.
Also, people they have more information today than they've ever had. I think it's in 1 Peter. It says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have in you. So, say we do this work of evangelism and we have people, well, God's not real, and if God was real, then why do we have this? Why do we have suffering? Why do we have evil? And you're just like, Abba, 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 Abba. And then it's like, well, Jesus is just a copycat. There was Dionysus and all this, and he was born December 25th, and he had all these same qualities. Jesus is just a copycat, Abba, Abba, Abba. So we are going to have to equip you with some apologetics as well, just to be able to answer some basic questions. And sometimes it's like, if you're interested, I'll get back with you on this. You don't have to sit there and stumble. But yeah.
I'm a hairdresser, and people sit down every day and they just pour their heart out immediately. Sometimes immediately. They just
Yeah.
start like saying, you know, I'm going through this in my marriage, or my kids this. And sometimes I don't know what to say, like as in sharing the gospel, but I am pretty good at being like, let me tell you what Jesus did for me in a time of darkness or in a
Right.
time of sadness. And
Right.
I can like share my heart on what God has done for me, but it's really hard for me to like pull out Bible verses or to be like, let me tell you about the Apostle Paul. Let me tell you,
Right.
it's really hard for me to do that, but it's really easy for me to pull from my
Right.
own perspective or time.
Well, I think the goal of this next several months is really to equip you with some key verses that will, in most circumstances, give an adequate presentation of what they need to be free. And, you know, we're not talking about memorizing 15 verses. You know, we're just talking about a small group of verses that we can all memorize together. And generally speaking, it's key. It's important that if you're going to evangelize, we have to be people of the Word. That means you got to read the Bible cover to cover more than once. That's just important. And is it hard? Yes, it's challenging. I do it 3 times a year. And it's because I want to be equipped to teach you. I want to be familiar with this book. I recommend every Christian read the Bible at least once a year, at minimum. Because you can't get the whole counsel without the whole thing. And then, of course, obviously come to teaching, come to, you know, church services and get the equipment. And whatever area you're gifted in, make sure that you're being trained and equipped in that by good, strong, and solid people. And I'll tell you this, the default is always, you know, can I pray for you? Can I pray for you? Because almost no one refuses prayer. We've had it happen a few times, but almost no one refuses prayer. Especially if you do it in kindness. Now, Courtney looked at me like, what? And I don't know the circumstances that you're facing, but whenever I offer to pray with someone, almost no one says no. So most people are willing to receive prayer to some degree. Well, we quit doing that about 15 years ago when we got a permanent sound system. There's a sound snake. I'm kidding. It was a sound snake. But, yeah, hopefully we can equip you all. This really wasn't about equipping you all. This was more about just giving you the like map. Hopefully we'll give you like the details, the roads, the cities, and the markers and all of that, the longitude and latitude, more specific along the way. This is kind of the big map, kind of where we're headed, the theme that we're going to talk about, because deliverance is salvation. We want to see people set free. God bless you all. We're already a few minutes over, and we will see you on, I believe we're having Adoration Night this Friday. So if folks are willing to come this Friday, we'll see you then. God bless.